Carl Spencer was a campus legend in college, handsome, with a wealthy family. I never imagined that 7 years after graduation, I would end up in bed with this man, with whom I had hardly any interaction during university. I woke up with a headache that seemed to last forever. As I turned over to grab my phone, I instead found myself touching a firm, muscular chest. The muscles on his chest rose and fell with his breathing, the warm sensation immediately jolting me awake. I sat up in shock, staring at the man beside me. He had been woken by my movements and now looked at me with half-open eyes. As I moved, the blanket slid off him, revealing a perfect set of abs, the edge of the blanket barely covering the muscles that stretched down toward his waist. His tanned skin contrasted sharply with my exposed arm, causing me to freeze for a moment. He blinked at me, still dazed from being woken up. It was unclear whether his irritation came from being disturbed or something else, but through his tousled hair, I saw the stormy look in his eyes. A beam of light from the slightly ajar curtain fell across his face. The contours of his sharp, chiseled features were accentuated by the shadows, his jawline perfectly sculpted, making his profile even more striking. Wait, this was Carl, right? The one who had people flocking to the campus bulletin board to confess their love for him. As our eyes met, the events of last night flashed through my mind. I mentally cursed, why was I always the one to initiate things? He raised his long fingers to shield his eyes from the light, his nails clean and neatly trimmed. I remembered that last night, it was with these hands, so distinct in their knuckles, that he had explored my body. My face turned crimson at the thought. Carl's voice was hoarse, tinged with a hint of sensuality, as he spoke. You're awake? Not going back to sleep? Why are you suddenly so quiet? I had never been in a situation like this before, and I had no idea how to respond to him. Fumbling, I tried to get dressed, desperate to leave the room. But the more hurried I became, the harder it was to put my clothes on. Amid the chaos, a pair of hands from behind helped me fasten my bra, and I heard his deep, seductive voice in my ear. What's this? You sleep with me and then want to run? I didn't. I quickly denied. Then you're going to make it up to me? I had never interacted much with Carl during college, so I wasn't sure what he meant by that. Hesitantly, I asked, what kind of compensation do you want? Guess. After a long pause, I grabbed my phone from the pile of clothes on the floor, took out the $200 I had hidden behind the case, and handed it to Carl. Let's part on good terms. With that, I hurriedly threw on the rest of my clothes. Carl held the $200 in his hand, looking at me. What do you mean by this? I stood by the bed, fully dressed, staring at Carl, who was wrapped in the blanket, completely exposed. His presence was overwhelming, and I felt a bit scared. I explained, feeling small, this is all I have. Carl furrowed his brows. If I were to sell myself, Sophia, do you think you could afford me? I was taken aback, he actually remembered my name. We had barely crossed paths in college, and rarely spoke to each other. I stood there, dumbfounded, shaking my head. Carl beckoned me over, and somehow I found myself moving toward him. He grabbed my hand and shoved the $200 back into it. I don't take relationships lightly. What happened last night, I'll take responsibility for. 1 week later, I was having dinner with a date set up by someone else at a restaurant. From a distance, I saw the man who had promised to take responsibility and then disappeared, walking toward me. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, looking serious and composed. The polished leather shoes made confident strides on the restaurant carpet. Carl stopped in front of me, but I pretended not to notice him, focusing instead on my steak. The tension emanating from him made me instinctively nervous, and I ended up cutting my steak with too much force, the knife scraping loudly against the plate. I quickly apologized to the man across from me. Sorry about that. Carl tapped the edge of the table near me, leaning down slightly to speak softly. After you're done, wait for me here. With that, he was led away by the waiter into a private room. I finished my meal, enduring the curious gaze of the man across from me. And then cancelled my next activity to wait for Carl. A little less than an hour later, Carl emerged from the private room, surrounded by people. He stood in the center of the group, exchanging pleasantries, then glanced at me. The others, sensing the cue, quickly ended their conversations, giving Carl the chance to break free. As he passed by me, he coldly muttered, "Follow me." I tightly clutched my bag and followed him all the way down to the underground parking lot. Carl opened the passenger door of a black Maybach and tilted his head, gesturing for me to get in. Once inside, he turned on the air conditioning, and the warm breeze from the vents began to make the space feel more comfortable. The car's interior was small and closed, and the scent of his cologne filled the air. He pulled out a cigarette and brought it to his lips, but then seemed to remember something. He took it away and tucked it between his fingers instead. Carl spoke in a low voice, explaining, "I was in Melbourne on a business trip this week and just got back today. I didn't have your contact details, so I couldn't let you know about my schedule in time. I just want to say that since I promised I'd take responsibility, I won't go back on my word." I gripped my bag tightly, unsure how to respond. Carl turned his head to look at me. "Maybe you can explain why you're here today." I wasn't good at lying, so I answered bluntly, "A friend of mine set me up with someone. Said he was a good match." Carl frowned. "Let me guess. You came to this date because you didn't believe I would take responsibility?" I nodded, then shook my head. "What do you mean? We're not from the same world. If neither of us says anything, this won't interfere with either of our lives." I paused before continuing, "We'll go back to how things were before. Living our lives without further involvement." Carl's world was one I could never reach. Even if I tried to force myself into it, I didn't think it would be a good experience. "You want to cut ties with me?" I nodded. He didn't respond, and the silence in the car became suffocating, making it hard to breathe. After a moment, he opened the car door, stepped out, and quietly smoked a cigarette outside. When he got back into the car, his cologne scent had faded, replaced by the lingering smell of tobacco. Carl exhaled deeply. "That night, you were the one who initiated things, right? Since you don't need me to take responsibility, now, I expect you to take responsibility for me." His words triggered my mind to replay the events of that night uncontrollably, and those intimate scenes made my face burn with embarrassment. Thinking of my modest salary, I sighed, embarrassed, and said, "I don't have the money to compensate you." "I don't need money." He spun a ring on his finger as he made his request. "Marry me." The situation felt so surreal, like a pie falling from the sky. I couldn't accept it with a clear conscience. My rational side made me suspicious. Why was Carl so eager to marry me? What was his real motive? I asked him, why the rush to marry? "Why me?" "Because I'm at the right age. And you just happen to be the right one. Also, because we already have the foundation of a married couple." Carl seemed to see through my concerns. "Do you think there's something about you that I would want to scheme over?" I didn't want to admit it, but he was right. I was just a poor girl, not particularly attractive. Marrying me would be a loss for him, no matter how you looked at it. After thinking for a while, I asked, "When do you want to get married?" "If you agree, the sooner the better." "I need to talk to my parents first." Carl nodded, understanding. "I'll go with you, and I'll speak on our behalf." Given my parents' temperament, a quick wedding was out of the question. I wasn't sure what Carl said to them in the room, but when they came out, their attitude had completely shifted. And they willingly handed me over to him. It only took 23 days from that moment to the wedding registry. When we left the marriage registration office, everything still felt so surreal, like it wasn't really happening. The winter air was biting, and my nose was turning red from the cold. The first thing Carl did when he got into the car was turn on the heat. He reached into the back seat and pulled out a paper bag. The bag contained a scarf. Although the craftsmanship wasn't exactly refined, it was warm. Carl helped me wrap the scarf around my neck and then asked, "When are you moving in with me?" I thought for a moment, then pushed it a few days later. This weekend? It would be easier than taking leave during the week, plus it gave me a few more days to adjust. Carl didn't rush me, simply nodded. "I'll come pick you up this weekend." When we were just one intersection away from my workplace, I asked Carl to stop the car. "I'll get off here." Carl found a spot to park and, taking his hand off the steering wheel, unbuckled my seatbelt for me. "Aren't we still a bit early?" "Your car attracts too much attention." I didn't want to be seen by my colleagues, becoming the subject of their gossip. Carl seemed unconcerned, waving off the issue casually. "Got it." I opened the car door and stepped out, waving goodbye to him through the window. He lowered the window on his side, leaned forward in the passenger seat, and extended his hand toward me. I didn't understand what Carl meant, but bent over to get closer. "What is it?" Carl spoke, "Get a little closer." I almost leaned entirely into the car. Carl was so close to me, I thought he was about to say something important. But instead, he gently cupped my face with his hands and placed a kiss on my forehead. It was the first time we'd been so intimate since that night we were drunk and ended up sleeping together. This time, we were both sober. And I was completely unprepared. Though it was just a small kiss on the forehead, it made my heart race. Still dazed, I stared at Carl's lips, which parted and spoke, "Have a nice day." I blankly replied, "You too." Seeing my response, Carl let out a light laugh, and his mood seemed much better than when I'd asked to get out of the car earlier. I straightened up outside the car, and Carl returned to the driver's seat. Turning to look at me. "I'm leaving now. I'll pick you up for dinner after work." The window slowly rolled back up, and Carl drove off. When I arrived at my desk, my manager immediately approached with a folder in hand. "Didn't you take the morning off? Why are you here already?" I forced a professional smile and replied, "I finished everything I needed to do." The manager set the folder down. "This ad campaign for the toner needs to be revised." Confused, I asked, "Didn't the client approve it before we left last week?" "Didn't you hear? The leadership changed. The new CEO who was appointed on Monday isn't happy with the version and wants us to redo it." I sighed and nodded resignedly. When the client isn't satisfied and asks for changes, there's no chance of any peace. The feedback is in the folder. I flipped through the folder, finding it filled with dense notes and suggestions. Suddenly, an unexplainable sense of grievance welled up inside me. I had just gotten married today, with no wedding, no blessings, and no affection from my partner, and yet here I was, sitting in front of a computer, revising proposals. I regretted it a little. I regretted rushing into marrying someone I barely knew. I kept my emotions hidden, quietly sitting at my desk and looking at the documents, though only I knew how little progress I was making. A message popped up on my phone. It was from Carl, who had added me as a contact less than 20 days ago. He said, "When you get to the office, take off the scarf, so you don't wear too much inside. It'll make you cold when you go outside." I glanced down at the scarf still around my neck, and Carl's message gently melted away the grievance I had been feeling. I didn't really know him, but there was still plenty of time ahead for that. And he wasn't treating me badly, was he? Before work was even over, Carl sent me another message, saying he was already downstairs. I remembered he'd said he'd pick me up earlier, but I had thought it was just casual talk since he was so busy with work, as I knew. I pushed my luck a little. "Can you park a little further away? Not right outside my office building?" Carl replied instantly, "I switched cars. I'm driving a regular BMW now." And then came another message, "Is it still not okay to park here?" Seeing he seemed a little put out, I thought, if I didn't let him park downstairs, I'd be the one being unreasonable. At the end of the day, as I stepped out of the office building, I saw Carl, tall and lean, lazily leaning against a black BMW. He was holding a nearly burnt-out cigarette. When he saw me coming out, Carl immediately stubbed out his cigarette and tossed it into a nearby trash can. While opening the car door for me, he asked, "How was work?" I remembered the proposal I had no clue about and fell silent. He didn't ask again, instead ruffling my hair. "Get in the car, I'll take you to get something to eat." The mix of tobacco and subtle perfume on Carl didn't smell unpleasant. These scents surrounding me helped ease the gloom I was feeling from work. Carl started the car and then reminded me, "Buckle up." Just as I clicked my seatbelt into place, he asked, "Where's your scarf?" I touched my smooth neck and realized I had left the scarf on my desk. I forgot it on my desk. "I'll go get it." I made as if to get out of the car. After all, it was the first gift he had given me, and I didn't want to treat it carelessly. Carl stopped me. "As long as it's not lost, it's fine. Just wear it tomorrow after work." His tone was calm, without any change in pitch. But I could tell Carl was a little upset. I understood his feelings. When something you give isn't valued, anyone would feel bad. "Sorry." Carl replied indifferently, "It's okay. I gave it to you, so it's yours. You can put it anywhere you like." Even though he said that, I could still feel that he wasn't entirely happy. I sat quietly in the car, and Carl didn't speak again. I didn't know how to start a conversation either. So I began to observe the car, which Carl considered ordinary. I ran my hand over the seat and commented, "This car looks really well maintained, like new." Carl glanced at me and smiled faintly. "I just picked it up today." Connecting the dots, I couldn't help but ask, "Is it because I didn't want you parking downstairs?" I hadn't seen him take it to heart earlier, so why had he suddenly chosen a car he considered ordinary? Carl kept his eyes on the road, lightly tapping the steering wheel with his fingers. "I understand your concerns. I also have the ability to ease them. If it makes you feel more at ease, I'll do whatever it takes." While waiting for the traffic light, he turned to look at me, his moon-like eyes gazing softly at me, full of tenderness. "I don't want you to feel like you have to hide once we're together. I'm also looking forward to you introducing me to your friends." Carl spoke slowly, with each word full of affection. As he treated me with such gentleness, I had a fleeting moment of confusion, almost feeling as though we had loved each other for a long time. I didn't know how to respond, and just then the light turned green, so Carl continued driving. And the topic was left there. He parked at the entrance of a narrow alley. I didn't see the restaurant and asked in confusion, "Are we already at the restaurant?" "It's inside the alley. The car can't go in." I got out of the car, walking beside him. Our fingers brushed lightly by accident, and a sense of shyness rose in me. We had already been more intimate than this, yet I still felt embarrassed. Carl didn't show any change on the surface. But the next time our fingers brushed, he tightly held my hand, our fingers intertwining. I couldn't even remember the last time I held hands with someone, probably in college, a long time ago. Carl's rich voice came from beside me, "We'll hold hands, hug, kiss. Do all the things couples do. Don't feel pressured just because we're married. We're just turning the ending into a beginning." I had no doubt that he could read my feelings. The fear and unease I felt about this rushed marriage, he could sense. He squeezed my hand tighter, as if giving me strength, urging me to have more courage for this confusing relationship. Carl said, "Sophia, do you believe that living unconventionally might lead to a more complete ending?" I gripped his hand tightly, trying to show him that I was serious about this marriage. As we passed through the narrow alley, the scenery opened up to reveal a beautiful view. The uniquely decorated restaurant stood not far ahead. Walking through the stone archway, I entered a quaint little courtyard. The waiter saw Carl and respectfully greeted, "Mr. Spencer." Then he led us to our seats. Carl handed me the menu, but I waved it off. "You order." "I don't have any particular preferences." Carl returned the menu to the waiter. "The usual, please." While we were waiting for the food, Carl poured me a glass of Pinot Noir. "Try it, the flavor is rich." I was about to take the glass when I noticed someone standing at the door of the private room. Like a reflex, I immediately stood up. The wine in my hand spilled onto the table due to my sudden movement, and I quickly apologized. Sorry. I'll step outside for a moment. Without waiting for Carl to react, I hurriedly left the room. I turned left, walked to the end of the wooden corridor, and there I saw the man who hadn't been in contact for 6 years. Tentatively, I called out to the sharply dressed figure, "Jake?" The man turned around. His face was the same as the youthful, sun-kissed boy from my memories, but his demeanor had completely changed. He had become mature and composed, with a hint of the cunning of an adult. "Sophia?" he asked. I walked toward him, taking in his appearance. As I looked at him, I couldn't control myself, and tears began to pour from my eyes. Jake impatiently asked, "Why are you crying?" Why was I crying? I stared at him, slowly wiping my tears, and turned to walk back toward the private room. Back in college, whenever I cried, he would always comfort me kindly, never once impatient. Love and indifference, so clear and unmistakable. Just as I entered the corridor, Carl suddenly pulled me into his embrace. I had no idea when he had come out, but his warmth made me feel secure. The tears that had stopped began to flow again, as though all the grievances in the world had erupted. Carl's voice came from above my head, tinged with a hint of possessiveness. "Are you sure you want to cry for another man in front of me, on the first day of our marriage?" He lightly patted my back. "Baby, stop crying." I gripped his suit tightly, trying to calm my emotions. Jake's voice came from behind me. "Carl Spencer?" My forehead rested against Carl's chest, and I could hear his voice muffled through his chest. Carl's tone had grown colder. "Who are you?" Jake quickly replied, "I'm Jake. We went to the same university, and played ball together." Carl frowned as if trying to remember, then he coldly said, "No recollection." Jake gave an awkward smile. "I see, it's been so many years." Carl's expression didn't show any emotion, but his voice carried a hint of impatience. "Do you need something? If not, my wife and I are going to have dinner." Jake's face showed disbelief, and after a brief pause, he asked, "You two are married?" I was about to pull away from Carl's embrace to respond, but Carl firmly pressed the back of my head, keeping me in his arms. Carl glanced at Jake. "Do you still know my wife?" I thought Jake would bluntly say no, but to my surprise, he replied, "Yes, we've met a few times." His tone gave no indication of regret or sorrow, making it seem as if our relationship was nothing more than a few casual encounters. Jake's words poured cold water on my heart, and the tiny flicker of a flame I had once kept for him was extinguished by his own hands, leaving behind nothing but smoke that made me tear up. I slowly loosened my grip on Carl's suit, letting my hand fall. Out of sight. Carl tightened his fist at the subtle change in my demeanor. Carl didn't want to get into any more of a conversation with Jake. "If you don't mind, I'll take my wife to dinner now." Jake didn't say anything else, just nodded in response. As Carl led me away, we hadn't gotten far before I heard Jake call my name. "Sophia, will you be happy?" My steps faltered. Would I be happy? I didn't know. I didn't respond and kept walking forward. My body only stiffened when Jake called my name, but Carl, holding me close, sensed the change immediately. I turned to look at him, and his face had turned dark. As we walked, I murmured, "Sorry." On the first day of our marriage, I had become a complete mess. I felt down, half because of Jake, and half because of my own self-doubt. It seemed I was really good at messing everything up. Could someone like me, dragging along someone as outstanding and gentle as Carl, really bring us both happiness? Carl remained silent, ignoring my apologies. It wasn't until we entered the private room again, and the table was filled with exquisite dishes, that Carl spoke. "Let's eat," he urged, gesturing for me to sit down. I didn't feel like eating, and after a long hesitation, I put down my chopsticks. "Do you regret it? Marrying me?" If you regret it, I can divorce you as soon as possible. Carl stopped mid-bite, his gaze slowly shifting from his plate to me. What did you say? I knew he had heard me, and heard me clearly. We didn't marry for love. And right now, I'm in a bad place. You don't have to sacrifice your own happiness for a mistake that can easily be forgotten. Marriage is a big deal, not a joke. You understand that, Carl. Carl put the food he had picked up back onto his plate. I understand. But what about you, Sophia? Do you really understand? Are you saying this because you're thinking of me, or because you regret it yourself? His words hit the mark. I was the one who was scared. The one who regretted. I fell silent, and Carl continued, his tone stern. On our wedding day, you're telling me that if you regret it, we can divorce as soon as possible. What do you take me for? What do you take marriage for? I lowered my head, tears falling down my face. I choked as I apologized, I'm sorry. Carl turned his gaze to the window, no longer looking at me. How many times have you apologized today? It had been many times. I felt embarrassed, as if all I could say was sorry. Eat. Afterward, I'll take you home. When we got back home, my parents were still watching TV. I greeted them briefly, before heading to my room. I was about to turn 28. My parents had always hoped I'd get married soon and start my own family. So, at this point, I felt like giving up and just going along with whoever would marry me. That's how I ended up in a hasty marriage with Carl. A decision made so recklessly. Only afterward did I realize that this was irresponsible to both myself and Carl. I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror, my nose red from crying. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold or from the tears. My phone rang, it was Carl. I answered, and his deep, rich voice came through the receiver. Next Wednesday, my parents will be back from Melbourne. We're thinking of having dinner with both families. Is that okay? I spoke with a slightly stuffy nose, okay. Are you crying again? Just from his voice, I could picture him frowning when he asked. Had I become so familiar with his subtle expressions? But clearly, we hadn't been together for long. No. I denied having cried. Our family doesn't have a history of divorce, and I don't want to be the first. Don't overthink things. Get some rest, I'll see you tomorrow. Carl's words had a kind of magic, soothing me. My mood lightened a bit. I'll make you breakfast tomorrow and bring it to you. Okay. Good night. Good night. By Friday, when I arrived at the office, the director called me to bring the advertising proposal to a client's company. I grabbed the files at my desk and hurried to catch up with the director. When we entered the client's conference room, I was stunned to see that the person in charge was Jake. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't sure how I got through the presentation, but thankfully, it went well in the end. The director and Jake chatted, while I stood silently at the side. Jake looked at me and asked, "He made you wear such a cheap scarf?" The director's gaze wandered between Jake and me. "Do you know Sophia?" "No." A seasoned professional, the director tactfully changed the subject. On the way back, the director didn't ask about my relationship with Jake. He had a high emotional intelligence. After work, Carl still came to pick me up in his black BMW. Once I got in the car, he asked, "Are you planning to move in on Saturday or Sunday?" I was taken aback, thinking for a moment before realizing he was asking when I'd move into his place. I asked him, "When do you want me to move in?" "I want it now," Carl answered without hesitation. His answer took me by surprise. Moving today would be a bit rushed, but thinking back to this week since we got married, he's been driving back and forth to pick me up from work every day. I felt like I should do something for him too. If moving today would make him happy, then I'd move today. "Okay, let's go move now." Carl turned to me, asking, "Really?" I nodded, confirming. The style of Carl's home matched his personal style on the darker, more serious side. He took out a pair of light pink slippers and placed them on the floor by my feet. They looked particularly out of place on the black and white marble tiles. "I bought these for you after I dropped you off on Monday." "They're new." "Monday? The Monday that ended so terribly?" I put on the slippers, and he led me toward the bedroom. Carl opened the bedroom door and said, "I ordered a vanity for you. It'll be delivered by Sunday at the latest." I hadn't expected him to be so thoughtful about adding new things. I had assumed I'd be the one to handle everything. "Thank you." He ruffled my hair. "It's my responsibility to make sure you're comfortable." The bedroom had a walk-in closet. Carl's clothes were neatly hung on the left side, while the right side was empty. "Should I put mine on the right?" "Yeah, and if you need more clothes, I'll go shopping with you tomorrow." By the time we finished arranging everything, it was nearly 11 o'clock. Carl had stayed with me the whole time, without having eaten a single bite. I opened the fridge and asked Carl, who was standing just a step away from me, "Are you hungry?" "It's fine," he replied. "Okay, I'll make you some corn chowder." He nodded gently. As I busied myself in the kitchen, Carl came up behind me and wrapped his arms around me. His chin rested on my shoulder, and he nuzzled against me. The sudden closeness made me nervous. Carl whispered in my ear, "This scene, I've been imagining it since I was 20. "What?" I didn't understand. Carl didn't explain, just laughed softly. "Sophia, thank you. I finally have a home." He wouldn't let go. And so I ended up finishing making the meal in his embrace. Carl ate with satisfaction. I wasn't entirely sure about Carl's work schedule, so I asked, "Are you going to work tomorrow?" Carl said, "I have a business engagement tomorrow afternoon." "Will you be back for dinner?" "I'll try to come back early. If I'm late, don't wait for me, just eat first." "Okay." Carl asked me to wash up first while he cleaned the dishes. When I walked into the bathroom, I noticed there were 2 sets of toiletries, neatly arranged together. The reality of marriage was beginning to sink in. After I finished my shower, I suddenly realized I had no sleepwear. I stayed in the bathroom for a while, thinking of a way to remedy it. If he hasn't come to the bedroom yet, could I slip out and grab my sleepwear and come back in? Just as my hand touched the doorknob, I heard the sound of slippers approaching outside. Startled, I quickly retreated. After about 5 minutes, Carl asked from outside, "Still not done?" I bit my lip, gathering the courage to ask, "Could you get me my sleepwear?" "Sure." Before long, Carl knocked on the bathroom door. I opened it just a crack and reached my arm out. I quietly said thank you as I took the clothes and quickly pulled my arm back, closing the door. These weren't the pajamas I had brought from home. They were a soft gray pink, made of silk, smooth to the touch. After changing, I opened the door and walked out, finding Carl sitting at the desk, working on his computer. "Go wash up," I said, feeling inexplicably shy, standing before him and looking elsewhere. Carl turned off his tablet. "I've already washed up in the guest bathroom." Only then did I notice he had changed into pajamas as well. They were the same style as mine, just in a different color. His were gray-blue. Carl noticed my gaze and smiled. "Couple set. I thought it looked nice, so I bought it." "Okay." I lay down on the right side of the bed. There was enough space between Carl and me for another person to lie down. The bedroom was dimly lit by the soft yellow light of the bedside lamp, creating an intimate and hazy atmosphere. Carl sighed. "Did we get too big of a bed?" I could tell what he meant, so I slowly moved closer to him. Carl couldn't stand my hesitant movements and immediately pulled me into his arms. With my cheek against his chest, I could smell the same shower gel scent he and I both used, and my face flushed with warmth. It felt too intimate. He slightly propped himself up, using the dim light to look at me. "Can I kiss you?" I felt a bit lost, not knowing how to respond. Deep down, I didn't want to reject him. I didn't reply. But he seemed to understand. Carl leaned down and his lips met mine. His soft lips weren't as difficult to accept as I had imagined. I gradually relaxed, and Carl, noticing my change, tried to deepen the kiss. Just as he made an attempt, I instinctively bit down on his tongue. The salty, sweet taste filled my mouth, and I quickly pulled away in panic. Carl's lips glistened, but he wasn't angry. In fact, I could feel that he was in a good mood. I explained, "I don't have much experience, sorry." Carl gently touched his forehead to mine and spoke in a soothing voice, "You don't need experience in this." There was a faint smile in his eyes as he spoke clearly, "Sophia, your innocent reaction brings me so much joy." Carl pulled away from above me and turned off the light. Like soothing a child, he slowly patted my back, "We'll take it slow. No rush." I knew that intimacy was inevitable in married life and had already prepared myself to give it to him when he wanted it. But hearing Carl say, "We'll take it slow," truly made me feel relieved. I thought this night would be hard to endure, but I ended up sleeping soundly. When I woke up, Carl was already gone. After washing up, I went to the kitchen to make breakfast, but when I passed the dining room, I saw breakfast already laid out on the table. There was a note on the milk carton, and the handwriting was especially carefree. It was Carl's handwriting, "Have a great day, see you tonight." Being with Carl was truly enjoyable. When I was with him, all my negative emotions stemmed from my own feelings of inadequacy, not from him. He would even comfort me whenever he noticed my negative emotions. In this light, maybe this marriage isn't so bad. In the afternoon, I went grocery shopping and cooked a simple dinner by evening, waiting for Carl to return. I thought he would come home late, but he came back just after 7. I took his suit jacket from him when he entered the hallway. "Back so early?" "I wanted to hurry back to have dinner with you." "Okay, go wash your hands first." "All right." Even though the meal was ordinary, Carl ate with great relish. His compliments were never annoying, they were so sincere. I thought to myself, the only things I can do for Carl are these little acts. My family wasn't wealthy, and I couldn't help with his career. Compared to him, my abilities were far inferior. The only thing I could do for him were these small, insignificant things. Carl slowed down his chewing as if he was thinking about something. He spoke, "Sophia. A dinner like this feels so far out of reach for me." His tone was tinged with such loneliness that my heart tightened uncontrollably, as if something had grabbed it. My parents are busy with work, so the maid has always cooked our meals. Since I graduated from elementary school, I've forgotten what it's like to have dinner together as a family. After I started working, because I was always busy, I'd just grab something to eat. Whatever it was didn't matter, I was alone. I looked at him as he spoke, a 30-year-old man, yet showing his loneliness so plainly. It made me realize how much he longed for a warm family atmosphere. So when he said last night, "I have a family now," this was what he meant. I forced a smile, "Now you have a family. I'll cook for you often." He emphasized, "I have you." I didn't know how to respond to his words, which seemed a little too direct. But Carl didn't make me feel too passive. After a brief pause, he continued, "You're very important to me, and there's a lot you can do for me. I've always believed that we complement each other, and in some ways, we're both equally valuable." I gazed into Carl's deep eyes, trying to see through him, but it was in vain. I asked, "Can you read minds?" Carl laughed and shook his head. He was only a few years older than me, but far more mature. Most of the time, Carl was serious and rarely smiled, and today I was surprised to find that his smile made him seem youthful. Carl answered seriously, "I don't have any mind-reading abilities. I just noticed your unease and lack of confidence in this marriage." Even a joke from me got a serious reply from him. I admitted, my heart unconsciously drawing closer to Carl. "I'm good to you simply because I want to be good to you, not to get anything from you." Do you understand, Sophia? Carl put down his chopsticks and sat up straighter. Your cautious attempts to please me make me feel like you're not comfortable in this marriage. The breakfast I brought him, the early move, accepting his kiss, cooking dinner for him, waiting for him to come home for dinner. Carl truly saw through my insecurities and discomfort in the small details of daily life. Carl picked up his chopsticks again and said with appreciation, "My wife's cooking is top-notch." My ears immediately turned red at the word wife, and at the childlike tone he used. After dinner, I went to clean up, but Carl insisted on helping. He rolled up the sleeves of his black shirt and secured them with a cuff. His hands, with distinct knuckles, held the plate as he washed it. Such moments were perfect for talking about deeper matters. It was like the first time I called his name. Carl. When Carl heard me, his hand holding the plate slipped, and it fell into the sink, thankfully not breaking. He took it up again and asked, "What's wrong?" I confessed, actually, the guy I met that day, Jake, was my first boyfriend. I continued, we started dating in our first year of college. And by our third year, he went abroad as an exchange student. We had agreed to get married after graduation. Because of the time difference and distance, we grew apart, and by graduation, we completely lost contact. We didn't even have a proper breakup. My first love wasn't a good experience, and since then, I've struggled to fully invest my emotions in loving someone. That day was the first time I had seen him in 6 years after we lost contact. After I finished speaking, Carl lowered his head, quietly washing the plate. Talking about an ex with your current partner wasn't the best topic, but I knew I couldn't hide it from him. A moment later, he asked, "Do you still love him?" I thought for a while before replying, "No, 2 years of dating. How deep could it be?" After 6 years of no contact, that little bit of feeling was long gone. "Then why were you crying when you saw him?" I hesitated. It was because I was thinking about how the confident and spirited boy I once loved had turned into someone so slick and cunning. It made me feel sentimental. It was like being suddenly reminded that time passes quickly. And everything changes. It made me feel a mix of fear and anxiety. Carl's tone turned a little sour. "So when you saw him, you just ran off and left me?" I shyly said, "I only ran out because I just wanted to confirm if it was really him." Once I confirmed, I could finally close that chapter. I was confirming that, after he came back, he still hadn't contacted me. Carl put down his plate, shook his hands, then took my hand with sincere eyes. "Do you want to write a beginning for our relationship?" I pulled my hand out of his tight grip, standing silently. But Carl wasn't going to let me off that easily. He looked at me with such seriousness. "Do you want to?" It was as if Carl was asking me for some kind of assurance, like he was buying insurance for this marriage, but really, it was me who should be afraid of being abandoned. I stopped joking and nodded gently. "Our story has already begun." Carl looked at me with such intensity that I couldn't resist wanting to look away, but he bent down and kissed my lips. It was a long French kiss, and this time I didn't bite his tongue. Afterward, both of us were a little out of breath. I felt embarrassed and didn't look at him as I tossed the bowl into my hand. "You wash the dishes today." I quickly ran out. Hiding in the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my burning cheeks, struggling to come back to reality after the kiss. Carl, done with the dishes, came and knocked on the bathroom door. "Is it so nice in there? You've been in there for a while." I awkwardly opened the door, only to see Carl's teasing smile, and I almost slammed the door shut again. Carl took my hand, as if asking me, or telling me, "Come watch a movie with me." I placed the snacks I bought in the afternoon on the couch and watched Carl carefully choosing the movie. The movie he picked was called Cold Mountain. I have a low tolerance for tearjerkers, and by the end, I was crying uncontrollably, curled up in Carl's arms. Carl wiped my tears with a tissue, and I choked, asking him, "Why aren't you reacting?" "Maybe I'm too happy right now to cry," he replied. On Wednesday, it was finally time for the two families to meet, as Carl had mentioned. I took the day off and dragged Carl to buy gifts early in the morning. We wandered through the mall, and I ended up picking out a pair of earrings. I looked at them and subconsciously said, "Would these be okay for your mom?" Carl shook his head, "No." I deflated. Then what should I get? I had never interacted with the wealthy wives in this circle. And I was afraid that whatever I bought wouldn't be to Carl's mom's liking. Carl answered my question, "My mom will be happy just to see you. Anything you get her won't be as good as a hug." I mulled over his words, and it took me a moment to realize that Carl was trying to comfort me in his own way, not wanting me to put too much pressure on myself. While I was still processing, Carl had already paid and had the earrings wrapped up. "It's just the gift I'm getting for your mom. What you bought doesn't really matter," he said. "We can pay for it together." After we bought the gift, Carl took me straight to the airport. We didn't wait long before Carl's parents arrived. His mom looked very young, well-maintained, and graceful in every movement, while his dad appeared a bit serious. I followed Carl and didn't get a chance to greet his parents before his mom surprised me. She tossed her suitcase and bag at Carl, then took my hand. With a kind smile, she said, "You're Sophia? Oh my goodness, you're even more beautiful than in the photos. Isn't it cold today?" I shook my head, "It's not cold." She pinched the scarf around my neck and scolded, "Carl, really, not only is the scarf he knitted ugly, but it's also been lying around for years, and now he pulls it out for you? I'll go shopping with you and buy a nicer one soon." I froze. Carl knitted the scarf? Carl seemed embarrassed, as if his secret had been exposed, and spoke with a touch of irritation, "If she wants anything, I'll buy it for her." "Don't bother, Mom. I'm just buying a scarf for Sophia, and you're so upset. Look at Sophia's clothes, everything's from you, right? You manage your wife's clothes, food, and travel, controlling every little detail. You're even worse than your dad," his mom teased. Her words implied that Carl was a bit overbearing. As the subject of their conversation, I didn't know how to end it. Fortunately, Carl's dad spoke up, and the family got in the car to head to the restaurant. I thought dinner would be awkward since it was our first time meeting, and the meal would surely be uncomfortable. I didn't expect the atmosphere to be so pleasant. Carl and I also found a chance to give gifts to both of our parents, and they were both really happy. After dinner, Carl's parents headed back to their villa in the suburbs, while Carl and I stayed in the city since we still had work the next day. On the way home, I asked Carl, "Mom said this scarf you've been knitting for years. Was it meant for someone?" He didn't want to talk about it, "It was for myself." I wisely stayed silent, realizing that he must have had an unrequited crush before. I understood. I thought Carl and I wouldn't have any big conflicts, but that was just my assumption, because I had planned the advertising campaign for Jake's company. The director arranged for me to go with the client's representative to retrieve the advertising data. The moment I saw Jake in the mall, I realized this must have been something Jake and my director had planned together. I didn't need to be involved in the final stages of the ad campaign, and certainly didn't need to follow up with Jake. But since I was being paid, I had to do my job properly. I walked up to him and greeted, "Jake." "Sophia. I didn't have your contact information, so I had to ask your boss to arrange this meeting. If it's not work-related, I'll just leave now." Jake hurriedly said, "Don't go yet, please let me explain." As we walked toward the counter, Jake asked, "Carl's not from your circle, right? Do you think a man like him is lacking women around him?" I laughed in disbelief. "What kind of man is he?" "Rich, handsome, and influential." "So? You should stay away from him. Not marry him. Do you think you two will have a good future together? So according to you, since he's so great, I should chase him relentlessly and never let go, right? Why should I stay away?" Jake was about to say something else, but I didn't want to listen anymore. To me, he was just a stranger, and there was no need to discuss my husband with a stranger. I didn't respond, and after a while, Jake seemed to realize he was wasting his breath. He sighed and fell silent. What I didn't know was that Carl saw the scene of Jake and me walking side by side in the mall. I was oblivious and finished the work with Jake. Afterward, we passed by a suit store, and I remembered Carl didn't have a single white shirt in his wardrobe, so I decided to buy him one. At the end of the workday, Carl came to pick me up. The moment I got in the car, I could feel something was off. The atmosphere in the car was unusually heavy. I smelled tobacco in the air, a scent that hadn't been around me for a long time. "Did you smoke?" I asked. Carl admitted casually, his voice neither loud nor soft. "I smoked 2 cigarettes." Concerned about his health, I asked, "Can you try not to smoke in the future?" Carl countered, "Does Jake smoke?" I answered honestly, "He didn't smoke before. But I don't know now." Carl let out a self-deprecating laugh. I was unhappy with how he was acting, so I frowned and asked, "What does he have to do with it?" He relented, "All right, I won't smoke anymore." But I still felt something was off with Carl. I asked, "Are you in a bad mood?" "No." He didn't want to say more, so I didn't press him. We returned home in silence. He went straight to his study, and I went to make dinner. When the meal was ready, Carl didn't come out to eat. Helpless, I put the food in the fridge to wait for him to finish. It was the first time I had encountered such a situation, and it was tricky. I had no one to talk to about it, no one to seek advice from. Carl had never put me in such a position before. We'd been married for such a short time, and already, he seemed tired of me? I sat in the dining room, lost in thought for a long time. Taking a deep breath to calm myself, I stood up. I took the shirt I bought for Carl into the bathroom, planning to hand wash it after my shower. I never expected that the bathrobe and towel on the bathroom rack were completely gone. After thinking for a while, the only possibility was that Carl must have asked the maid to tidy up the room. I called Carl, wanting him to bring me my pajamas. But after calling him several times, he ignored me. I gave up calling him, feeling a bit wronged. I hadn't done anything wrong, but he just left me hanging. At night, emotions run high, and the more I thought about it, the more wronged I felt. Before long, tears welled up in my eyes. I wiped away the tears, and could only put on the shirt I had bought for him first, before going out to get my bathrobe and pajamas. As soon as I opened the bathroom door, I saw Carl. My hair was still dripping water, and the droplets fell onto the white shirt, making it almost transparent, revealing the curve of my figure beneath. The shirt barely covered my hips, and my legs were exposed beneath it. His gaze landed on me, making me not know where to look. Carl's voice was no longer as calm as usual, it was cold, like ice in the middle of winter. "Whose shirt are you wearing?" I answered truthfully, my voice still hoarse from crying, "Yours." Carl's expression was strange. "I don't own a white shirt." He seemed to put things together, his tone becoming anxious. "Whose shirt is it?" "Is it Jake's?" I frowned. "What are you talking about?" "I saw you with him at the mall today." He asked in a low, cold voice, "What will it take for you to love me?" I froze for a few seconds, wondering if I had misheard. I took a few steps toward where he was standing. "I didn't catch that, could you say it again?" There was still a distance between us, a step's length. Carl grabbed my wrist with one hand, the other hand resting on my waist. His eyes lingered on me, clearly assessing me. I didn't want to look at him, didn't want to see the coldness in his eyes, as if I were some kind of sinner. His mood had been off since the end of work today, and now it was even worse. He asked, "Did you cry?" "No." I denied it. "Then why are your eyes red like a rabbit's?" Carl ruthlessly pointed it out, then mocked, "Shouldn't I be the one crying?" My heart couldn't help but tighten for him, and I grabbed his sleeve, asking, "What's wrong with you?" Carl pulled me into his arms. His tears fell onto my shoulder, sending a shiver down my spine. He was crying? Carl sighed, his tone slow, as if he were negotiating with me. "Sophia, could you please love me?" I didn't understand why he said that, but still responded seriously, "I will love you." "Can you stay away from Jake?" I really care about you being with him. Carl's arms around me were shaking slightly. Unknowingly. He was scared. But I didn't understand what he was afraid of. I patted his back, just like he had once patted me to help me sleep, soothing him. If you don't like it, I won't spend time with him. Carl's deep, captivating voice carried a hint of persuasion as he made a request. Can you not wear other men's clothes? Why would I wear another man's clothes? I asked in return. This white shirt. Carl didn't finish his sentence. And I interrupted him. This shirt was something I bought for you today when I went shopping. I remembered you didn't have a white shirt, so I got you one. I paused and continued explaining. Jake and I just went to finish some work at the mall, don't overthink it. I kept patting his back, waiting for Carl's emotions to gradually calm down. Carl released me, and I stepped out of his embrace. He rubbed his face with his hand. Stared at me for a long while, then spoke. It's been a long time since I've been on the verge of losing control of my emotions. Love really makes people blind. Before I could say anything, he continued, all these emotions are because of you, Sophia. I love you more than you think. Do you believe it? My face flushed a deep red, feeling extremely embarrassed. I really was easy to comfort. And all the little grievances from before vanished. But I still accused him, all of this is because you don't trust me enough. Carl shook his head in denial. It's not that I don't trust you, it's that I don't trust myself to really keep you by my side. He pulled me into his arms again. Love can make a person feel insecure, Sophia. I was surprised by Carl's unexpected confession. Slowly starting to realize that I meant something different to him. Although, at the moment, I still didn't understand why his feelings for me had progressed so quickly. I kept avoiding Jake. He could definitely sense the shift in my attitude, but he still wouldn't give up, constantly trying to contact me. One weekend, I was lying on the swing chair Carl had installed on the balcony, enjoying the sun, when my phone rang several times. I hadn't planned on answering, but the other party was persistent. On the fifth call, I gave in, put down the book in my hands, and picked up the phone. The caller ID said it was Jake. Jake invited me. How about we grab dinner together this weekend, no work? I frowned, not understanding his behavior, and repeated, you know I'm married, right? There was a brief silence on the other end. Then Jake's voice came again, I know, but you can't just stop socializing because you got married. Who told you I don't socialize? Do you even know my friends? Jake, how long are you going to keep thinking you know what's best for me? I took a breath and continued, don't tell me you regret it now and want to get back together. What if I said I regret it? I laughed in disbelief. His phone call had ruined my peaceful weekend. I shouted at the phone, I don't care if you regret it. Who do you think you are? Just because you regret it, I'm supposed to get back with you? I owe you nothing. If you really feel guilty for going abroad and want to do something for me, the only thing I want you to do is stay away from me. Is that clear? I quickly hung up and threw the phone onto the table. Before I could calm down, a familiar voice came from behind me. Carl, as steady as ever, asked, Jake? I stood up from the swing chair, feeling awkward that Carl had seen my outburst just now. Weren't you at the company? How come you're back? I asked him. Carl waved a folder in his hand. I forgot to bring some documents. I nodded lightly and then tentatively asked. You didn't come back long ago, right? I just wanted to know how much Carl had heard. Carl walked over to me, and with his free hand, he gently pinched my cheek. I've been here since the phone rang. I covered my face. How embarrassing. Carl pulled my hand away from my face, leaned down, and kissed my cheek lightly. He stared into my eyes, and I looked back at him. Carl's eyes were sparkling, and I could feel his joy. Though he had so much to say but only uttered, thank you for choosing me unwaveringly. My face turned crimson, my heart pounding rapidly. Has anyone told Carl that simple, somewhat clumsy, yet sincere words can be far more powerful in a relationship? Carl ruffled my hair. I'm leaving. See you tonight. The calm, windless days came to an end the first time I visited Carl's company. Since Carl had always picked me up from work, I decided to go pick him up for once. When I got to the company building, I called him, but he didn't answer. I guessed he might be in a meeting, so I decided to wait for him in the lobby. 30 minutes later, I saw Carl coming down the elevator with a professional-looking woman. It seemed like an ordinary scene, but something was off. The tie around his neck wasn't the one I had tied for him this morning. It was black, while I had tied him a dark blue one. I watched as Carl and the woman chatted and laughed while leaving the building. Strangely, I didn't feel any urge to confront him. Why had his tie changed? Why didn't he answer my call? I took the subway home, waiting for him until 2:30 a.m. At around 7 the next morning, Carl texted me, saying he would be back late and I didn't have to wait for him. But I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room, watching a comedy show on TV. Everyone on screen was laughing, but I couldn't seem to smile. When Carl came back and saw the TV on, he walked over toward me. He reached out to gently touch my face and asked softly, "Didn't you say you wouldn't wait for me? Why aren't you sleeping? Are you not feeling well?" I shook my head, but the strong scent of women's perfume on him made me wonder, had he been with that woman the whole time? I yawned to cover up the tears that had welled up. "I'm just so tired." Carl smiled a little, wiping away my tears. "Night owl, go to sleep. I'll turn off the TV." On the third day he came home late. I returned to my own house. My mom asked if I had been wronged, and I told her Carl was on a business trip and I wanted to stay at home for a couple of days. That evening, Carl called me several times. I didn't answer and didn't plan to. But when it seemed like he wasn't going to give up, and I worried he might call my parents and make them worry, I hesitated and finally picked up. "Where are you?" Carl's voice on the other end was urgent, even tinged with a bit of panic. I turned on the light and went to the window to look at the stars outside. "At my parents' house." There was a brief silence on the other end. Carl took a moment to calm down before his voice softened a little. "Your parents? And what about my home? Sophia, what about our home?" I didn't answer, and he continued, "You left without saying anything. Do you know how scared I was? What happened? Why did you suddenly want to go back?" I came up with an excuse. "I just missed my parents." Predictably, it didn't fool him. Carl sighed helplessly. "Do you really think I'll believe that? I'm coming to find you." He didn't give me a chance to refuse and hung up immediately. I stood by the window, still secretly hoping he'd appear soon. A black Maybach appeared in the otherwise ordinary street. He called me, asking seriously, "Are you coming downstairs, or should I come up?" "I'll come down now." It was late, and I didn't want to wake my parents. I stood in front of Carl, and he pulled me into his arms. "When there's a problem between us, we need to solve it. Running away like this doesn't help." His voice was as reassuring as always, and lying in his arms, I suddenly felt the courage to ask, "Did you have someone you really liked in college? Did you meet her again?" Without hesitation, he admitted, "Yes." I was a bit surprised that he didn't try to hide it at all. "Do you still like her?" I asked. Carl paused for a moment before answering, "I liked her, a lot." Yes, if he didn't like her that much, why would he have knitted a scarf for her and kept it for years? "Then why are you here with me?" I gripped his shirt, asking for some strength. "A few days ago, I went to your company, and I saw you leaving with a woman. Laughing and talking. That night, you didn't get back until after midnight, and you still smelled like perfume. Was that her? The one you like?" When we lose our rationality, even the smallest details can spiral into a big drama in our minds. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed to make sense. The logic fit. To my surprise, Carl smiled brightly, rubbing my hair. "So, you're jealous?" I gave him a cold stare. I'm just thinking if this marriage was a mistake. Carl stopped smiling and became serious. The person I like is you. I've liked you since college. Wait, what did you just say? I thought I had misunderstood. I noticed you in your freshman year when you were on the cheerleading team. You were always at the back, not very good at dancing, clumsy, but I thought you were both silly and cute. Later, I started sitting behind you in classes when I didn't have any of my own. I was watching you. One time, I overheard you say you liked steady men, so I stopped wearing bright clothes that made me look childish. All my wardrobe is full of dark clothes now. When you passed out from low blood sugar while practicing a cheerleading routine in your sophomore year, I was the one who took you to the infirmary. I left quickly because I didn't want people talking, but I heard you later thanked Jake for taking you to the infirmary. You don't know how regretful I was for not waiting until you woke up. You started dating Jake, so I had no choice but to silently protect you from the sidelines. After graduation, I've been alone. Maybe it's because I was busy with work. Or maybe I had already decided on you in my heart and subconsciously resisted others. Carl sighed. I thought we'd never have a story again. He nuzzled my neck gently. Last time, you asked who the scarf was for. I wanted to give it to you. I've wanted to give it to you since college. I was taken aback. To me, Carl and I barely had any interactions during college. How could he have liked me back then? Carl patted me. And I snapped back to reality. He said, I can't remember exactly why I started falling for you, but I do remember the first time I saw you during a morning jog. Your ponytail bounced with energy, glowing in the light of the rising sun. It was beautiful. I'd never felt anything like it before, as if I were breathing fresh air for the first time. I stayed silent, waiting for him to finish speaking. Sophia, Carl continued. I don't know why I like you. We hardly spoke back then. But even so, it was enough. I couldn't help myself. I was drawn to you, and I couldn't fight it. Hearing this, I suddenly realized that a woman's intuition is often spot on. The way Carl looked at me always gave me the feeling that we'd been in love for years. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. He had silently loved me all along. I asked, why didn't you say anything before? Because, in your eyes, our story was just beginning. I didn't want to pressure you. For me, there would have been pressure. I would have felt like I needed to repay him for all his sacrifices, even if I didn't love him yet. But what Carl wanted was a love that was sure and unwavering. Carl's tone softened, a mix of helplessness and affection. At work, I'm confident. But when it comes to you, I have no idea what to do. Suddenly, I thought of our first time together. That night when I was drunk, was that your doing? Carl shook his head. I was handling some things and saw you drunk, trying to catch a cab. I just wanted to make sure you got home safely, but I never expected. Don't say it. I interrupted him, embarrassed just thinking about what happened next. We held each other in silence for a while. I asked, so who was that woman? Carl smiled mysteriously. I'll keep that a secret for now, but I promise I'll tell you when the time is right. His enigmatic smile made it hard to unravel the mystery. I thought about my parents' reaction and asked, how did you convince my parents to let me marry you? I showed them my financial report, my medical checkup, and our marriage agreement. I remembered looking over the marriage agreement before. It was surprisingly favorable to me. I thought it was too good to be true, so I had a lawyer review it. If Carl and I ever divorced, I would get a substantial amount of assets. No wonder my parents agreed. Carl leaned in close and whispered in my ear, if you ever have negative feelings, just talk to me like you did tonight. I'll do the same if I'm feeling down. We've skipped the usual process of getting to know each other, and we can't be silent in this marriage. If we are, it'll collapse. I nodded quickly. I'm sorry. I'll talk to you about everything from now on. Carl let me go, then took my hand. Come back home with me? I thought for a moment. I'll tell my parents first thing in the morning. Then I'll come with you. I didn't expect Carl to stay in the car all night. The next morning, he brought breakfast to my house, and after we ate, he took me back to his place. As soon as we stepped inside and changed our shoes, Carl pressed me against the entryway wall and kissed me. Wait, did he just bite me? I pushed him away, shocked. Carl looked down at me, his eyes full of satisfaction. This is your punishment for doubting our marriage when you were angry. Carl rubbed his chin against my cheek. From now on, don't doubt our marriage, okay? I nodded, still in disbelief, while pushing him away. Go shave, you're too prickly. In just one night, his chin had already grown a rough stubble, short and sharp. Carl handed me his jacket and walked toward the bathroom. On the day we held our wedding reception, the rings we exchanged were simple, plain bands, nothing fancy at all. They looked cheap, but I still wore mine carefully for a few days, thinking it was our wedding ring. Then, Carl told me that it wasn't our wedding ring. Sitting on the sofa with a book in hand, he casually turned a page and said, I had a designer custom make our wedding rings. They'll be ready in a few days. I raised my hand and asked, then what's this? He glanced at it and answered casually, it's just a tool for the wedding ceremony. So, how did the real wedding ring end up on my finger? That night, I was so exhausted that I could barely lift my eyes to look at Carl. He lay on top of me, catching his breath. Just as I was about to drift off to sleep, Carl grabbed my hand. I instinctively pulled away, saying, no. Carl, having had his fill, was full of energy. He leaned down to my ear and coaxed, baby, don't move. Let me put your wedding ring on. Then, the cold ring slid onto my fourth finger. The next morning, after I had fully woken up, Carl explained that the woman I had met at the company was the designer of the engagement ring. Since Carl was busy with work during the day, he could only meet her in the evenings to discuss the wedding ring. He'd also kept it a secret from me, wanting to surprise me. But the wedding was over, and the ring still hadn't arrived. I squinted, and what about that day when you changed your tie color? Care to explain? Carl frowned, recalling the event. After a moment, he said, the tie got inked by my pen. Fortunately, my shirt underneath was black, so it wasn't too noticeable. Otherwise, I would have had to change the shirt too. Later, when I was on a business trip, I felt that the engagement ring was too large and too attention-grabbing, so I thought about threading it onto a chain and wearing it as a necklace. But in my rush, I couldn't find a chain, and I ended up leaving the ring on the vanity Carl had custom made for me. On the train, I looked down at my bare finger and panicked. What if I had lost the ring? I spent the rest of the day in a state of unease, and when I got home, I saw Carl's serious face. He seemed distant, hardly acknowledging me. I closed my eyes and quickly said, Carl, I've done something wrong on this trip. As soon as he heard that, the glass in his hand shattered as it fell to the floor. He quickly walked over, pretending to be calm, and asked, what did you say? Please listen to me. I saw his expression turning darker and quickly tried to explain. Carl rubbed his forehead, and any trace of calmness was gone. Sophia, do you even love me? How could you go look for another man? The misunderstanding was growing. Seizing the opportunity in his silence, I hurriedly explained, there's no other man. The thing I'm sorry for is, I lost the wedding ring. My voice started strong but trailed off, unsure if Carl had heard me clearly. Carl let out a relieved sigh, his tension easing, though he was still angry and reproachful. You don't care about the things I give you at all. First it was the scarf, now the wedding ring. What's next? I wrapped my arms around his and softly apologized, I'm sorry, there won't be a next time. Carl pulled out the ring box from his pocket, took out the wedding ring I had misplaced for several days, and slid it back onto my finger. Don't take it off again. Okay. I sighed in relief. Then asked curiously, where did you find it? On the vanity. As the year end approached, Carl's workload increased, and his time at home became unpredictable. On the day it snowed for the first time that winter, Carl still hadn't returned home. I sat alone on the balcony, watching the snow gently fall, waiting for Carl to finish work. The night was quiet, the streetlights warm, and the snowflakes drifted softly down. This scene felt oddly familiar. Suddenly, I remembered that winter during my first year of college, when it had snowed just like this. I had just left the library. First, I felt the cold, then the awe. The corridor outside the library was filled with people, some taking pictures, some watching the snow, and some waiting for others to bring umbrellas. Carl stood beside me in a white down jacket. His presence as pure and clean as the snow. Lost in the memory of that scene, I didn't notice that Carl had already come home. He wrapped his arms around me from behind and softly asked, "What are you thinking about?" "I was thinking that you look better in light-colored clothes." Carl chuckled softly in my ear, his voice clear and crisp. A melody to my ears. "Then I'll wear them just for you." I gently squeezed his hand resting on my lower abdomen and said in a soft tone, "Thank you for loving me for so many years." Carl looked puzzled. Why say that all of a sudden?" I laughed softly too. "I think I love you a little bit more now." He bent down and kissed my cheek, the gesture so affectionate it made my heart skip a beat. We didn't speak any further. Simply leaning against each other, watching the same snowfall. This wasn't the first time we'd watched snow together, nor would it be the last. We would watch the snow and listen to the rain together, doing many things side by side, and through it all, our love would only grow stronger. End of story.